Reading philosophy is pretty much unlike reading anything else. It takes a special set of skills to read philosophy successfully. And if you don't have that toolkit, then reading philosophy can get really, really frustrating. So in this video, I'm going to show you the tools that you need to read philosophy successfully. Okay, we're going to get going with that right now. If you're just starting out reading philosophy, there's basically two main things that you need to appreciate. The first is that philosophy can be and often is really, really difficult. So to deal with that, you need to take it slowly. You need to read whatever it is you're reading, the book, the article, whatever. You need to read it slowly. You need to read it in a quiet and relaxing environment. And you're probably going to need to read it multiple times, at least 2. But I always suggest to my students to read things through 3 times. And the second thing to appreciate is that philosophy is basically unlike anything else you're going to read. It's obviously not like literature, it's not a narrative, it's not a story typically, but it's also unlike a lot of non-fiction in the sense that you're not dealing mostly with facts or data or anything like that. It's something else, it's something all on its own. So to get to grips with reading philosophy, what we need to understand is, what are the things that we're going to find in a piece of philosophy? How do we identify those different aspects? And what do we do with them? Okay, so here are the most important things that we're going to be finding in reading a piece of philosophy. First up, we're going to try and identify the topic. Like, what is the general subject of this piece of philosophy? Is it about justice? Is it about the mind, about knowledge, about gender, about logic, or whatever? Now, often a philosophy book or a philosophy article can be about multiple topics. All of the stuff I'm talking about here applies to each of those topics that it's about. So next up, we have the question, the philosophical question that's being posed. So if our topic is justice, the question might be a very general one, like, what is justice? What's the best theory of justice? Or it might be something quite specific, like, what is the best argument for or against this specific theory of justice that these guys are talking about? Third, you might find some justification or explanation for being interested in that question in the first place. Okay, so sometimes that will just be obvious, like, why do we care about justice? Well, because we care about justice. But if we're thinking about a particular topic in, logic or philosophy of mind or metaphysics, it might be kind of obscure why the author is interested in that particular question. So they might do some work to say, okay, and I think this question is interesting because blah, blah, blah. And that will pretty much divide into intrinsic reasons versus extrinsic reasons. So by intrinsic, I mean, that question is intrinsically interesting. There's something about that question that just draws us in and of itself. But they might also give extrinsic reasons. Okay, we should work out an answer to this question because if we solve this question, it will help us to solve other questions that we're naturally interested in. Fourth, the thesis. What is it that the author is trying to argue? So they've given you a question and now they're talking about, here's my answer to the question. Here's what I think the best answer to that question is. Often philosophers will spend quite a lot of time spelling out their thesis in detail, particularly if it is unusual, right? If it's a kind of a worldview or a way of thinking about things that isn't intuitive or isn't usual amongst philosophers, they might spend a lot of time in explaining exactly how their theory is going to work. They might also be describing other possible answers to the question, right? So they've given you a question, they've given you their answer, but they might also sketch out, well, here's some of the other options that you might take, okay, with a view to saying my answer to the question is better than these other potential answers to the question for these reasons. And then last but definitely not least in this list, we've got the arguments, okay? The author will give you positive arguments in favour of their thesis, and they might also be giving you negative arguments against the other potential answers to that question, right? So they're saying, you've got all these potential answers, here's an argument against this one, here's an argument against this one, so here's my positive argument in favour of the one that I like, my thesis, my answer to the original question. So as you can see, in one piece of philosophy, there's lots of different things that the author is trying to do, and what we really need to understand is that we need to separate out all these different things because we're not going to read them. We're not going to engage with each of those different things in quite the same way. Okay, so here's a method that I would recommend for reading a piece of philosophy. Okay, so first up, we're going to skim read, quickly read through the whole piece. And there we're specifically looking out for the topic, the question, and the author's thesis. We're trying to get clear on what they are. And we're also trying to pick out which bits of the writing correspond to which of those kind of bits that I was talking about before. So which bits of that book are the author's positive arguments, like maybe pages 5 to 10 or whatever? Which bits of it are their negative arguments? Which bits are they explaining their view? Which bits are they criticizing other views? And at this stage, this initial skimming stage, we're not trying to get to grips with exactly what that argument looks like. We're not trying to get to grips with exactly how the thesis works or how the author argues for it. What we're trying to do is get an overall sense of what they're arguing for and, roughly speaking, how they're going to do it. Then we're going to do our detailed second reading. And in this second reading, what we're going to try and extract from that piece of writing is precisely what the author's thesis is. So we might go back to the bit of the book that we've already found to be, here's the book when the author talks about their thesis, and we look at that really carefully and we understand in detail exactly what they're saying and what they're not saying. We're going to go to the bits where the author is setting out their main positive argument, and we're going to look at, okay, exactly how are they arguing for this thesis? And then maybe there's some other bits of the book that we kind of looked through on our skim read where we thought, that's not exactly directly related to either the thesis or the positive argument, so maybe on our detailed reading we skip those bits and we only come back to them if we need them later on. Okay, and then if we're really trying to get to grips with pinning down our interpretation of what the author's saying, then I would suggest a targeted third reading. And in this third reading, we don't go through the whole thing again. We go specifically to the bits we need. So if we're trying to understand, well, I get what the author's saying here, but I'm not quite sure what they're saying about that bit of their thesis, okay? And I know from my kind of initial skim reading that they're talking about that on pages like 22 or whatever. Then I would go straight to that bit. I would read through those passages in a really careful way, maybe pull out some quotes to support my interpretation of what the author is trying to say. Okay, so what we're getting out of that 3-stage reading is an interpretation of what the author's saying. That is, we can talk about the topic, the question they're asking, what their thesis is, and a pretty good idea of how they're arguing for that thesis. As it were, at this stage, I could write a pretty good summary of what the author's up to on any of those points. So I've got an interpretation of what it is they're trying to say. Now, an interpretation isn't the same thing as an analysis, okay? So when we're reading a piece of philosophy, the first step is to come up with our interpretation of what the author's saying. But then if we want to take our reading further, our understanding of what they're saying further, we're going to have to get into philosophical analysis. And basically what we're now aiming to do when we move on from interpretation to analysis is basically say, well, to what extent do we agree with what the author's saying? I've got a good idea of what they're saying from my interpretation step, but now I want to look at their argument, okay? Is it any good? Do I agree with their conclusions? And the important thing in analysis is we don't want to just make it about opinions, right? It's not like, do you happen to agree with the position that they come up with? It's more about, okay, we're going to look at their argument. We're going to take their argument. Maybe we put it out in premise conclusion form so we can see exactly what they're assuming, what they're asking us to believe, and what they're asking us to infer from what. And then we're going to ask some pretty much standard questions of philosophical analysis. Why should I believe those premises? And do the conclusions that the author's drawing follow logically from those premises? Okay, so that's pretty much a standard template for philosophical analysis. If the author doesn't give us good reasons for believing the premises, or there's not enough justification there for those premises, or if it's not obvious that the conclusion follows logically from those premises, then I've got good reason to doubt the author's conclusion. That's really what we're trying to come up with in philosophical analysis. Having said that, you don't have to do this kind of deep analysis all the time when you're reading philosophy, okay? So to be a good reader of philosophy, it's not like you always have to get into the deep analysis. And you know, sometimes you just shouldn't. If you are reading philosophy to get a better sense of what philosophers say, you don't always want to go too deep into the analysis. And you know, sometimes that can detract from the pleasure of reading philosophy purely to find out what different thinkers think about the world. So there's a sense in which, in order to do philosophy, we have to be analysing pieces of philosophy. But to read philosophy and to get something out of it and to enjoy doing it, we don't have to do the full thing of philosophy. We don't have to do all the analysis coming up with exactly what we think about what the author's saying, okay? Particularly when you're getting into philosophy, getting into reading philosophy for the first time, I'm going to say the emphasis should be on the reading, the interpretation, the understanding, as opposed to going deep into the analysis. So here are some bits of advice for people who are just getting into reading philosophy for the first time. When you're starting out to read philosophy, don't overanalyze it. Read lots, interpret what the author's saying, try to understand what it is they're trying to get across, but don't go too deep into the analysis. That can actually be a hindrance to your getting something out of the reading. Second, I'm going to advise you to read plenty of modern, recently written bits of philosophy. So that can be secondary literature, talking about the great dead philosophers of the past, or it can be contemporary bits of philosophy from contemporary thinkers. There's always a trouble in trying to interpret the great thinkers of the past by reading their own words. All of the bits that I was talking about earlier, the topic, the thesis, the argument, they're not always talked about very clearly, okay? So you go and read some of the Socratic dialogues in Plato, and it's not always clear, okay, exactly what is the positive thesis being argued for here? What is the argument? Who's arguing for what? What are the premises? What are the conclusions? This stuff often isn't clear. And my own take on this, which is kind of controversial, not everybody will agree with this, but I much prefer giving to my students and for my own reading contemporary philosophy. It might be stuff about the past, but it's stuff written by modern day contemporary philosophers. I just find it so much easier and kind of more satisfying to read. But kind of that's just my own take. If you like reading, you know, Plato, Hume or whatever in their own words, then you go for it. Third bit of advice, pick general scope works, things that talk about a topic in general, rather than works of philosophy, particularly modern bits of philosophy that kind of zoom in myopic detail on one tiny little bit. If you're reading those kind of, you know, journal papers, contemporary journal papers that focus on one tiny bit of one tiny little argument, you're soon going to be questioning, well, why should I care about that? And like, maybe you shouldn't, right? What you really care about is a big question like, what is the best theory of ethics? How should I live a life? What is justice? How can we gain knowledge of the world? So initially you want to read books that speak to those whole debates, kind of missing out some of the detail. And kind of related to that, I'm going to advise you, if you're going to continue reading philosophy, going a bit deeper, at some point you want to read one modern textbook. It can be a textbook that tries to cover a whole bunch of areas of philosophy, but if you know that there's an area you're interested in, right? If you're interested in justice or ethics or the mind or whatever, go and get a textbook on ethics, philosophical ethics, or on philosophy of mind or whatever. That will take you through the basics of what are the main questions in this area, who are the main philosophers, contemporary and historical, to read, kind of what did some of the great thinkers think about these issues. And it might also take you through analysing how to start analysing those arguments in detail, okay? That's a really good way to get into philosophy, as opposed to just picking up, you know, Plato, Aristotle, Hume, and trying to read through them in their own words, kind of without any of the help that modern scholarship adds to that historical stuff. And if you want to take it even further than that, if you want to kind of build up your philosophical knowledge and expertise to somewhere like where you'd be at the start of a philosophy degree, then at some point you're going to want to pick up a book on philosophical skills, something on philosophical analysis or informal logic or something like that, something that's going to allow you to take any philosophical argument and start to put it in premise conclusion form, pull it apart, work out whether the conclusion really does follow from the premises. Okay, so reading that kind of stuff, it's not always fun. Compare it to reading in a second or a third language, right? You can't just get the literature and start reading. You're going to need a grammar book. You're going to need a dictionary to help you out. No one's going to enjoy reading a grammar book or a dictionary, but they are there to help you out with the skills that you need to get the most out of reading the fun stuff, like in your second, third, whatever language. And it's the same with philosophical skills, how to do philosophical analysis. At first, it can be a bit of a trudge to learn that stuff, but once you've got it, it's going to help you get a lot more out of the enjoyable bits of philosophy. So there's loads more to say about how you can get the most out of this process of learning philosophy, particularly if you're a student, particularly if you're new to philosophy. So if you want to hear a bit more about that, go and take a look at this video over here. Thank you so much to my Ko-Fi supporters for helping to support the content on this channel. And thank you to you for watching this far. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you guys back here soon.